Hi, everyone. I'm Doug Black, Editor-in-Chief at Inside HPC, and I'd like to welcome three distinguished guests we have today. We'll be speaking about next week's ISC conference, the International Supercomputing Conference in Hamburg, Germany. It's one of the two of the biggest industry conferences of the year annually. And with us today, we have Katie Antypas. She is Division Deputy at NERSC, which is the National Energy Research Scientific Computing Center. We have Earl Joseph, CEO of industry analyst firm Hyperion Research. And we have Addison Snell, co-founder and CEO of Intersect 360 Research. And welcome, everyone. I was looking over the agenda for this year's conference and some of the facts and figures. There will be 147 exhibitors this year, which is a 15% jump from last year. And, I think last year's conference, we're still kind of emerging from the pandemic. It feels we've kind of left that behind a little bit, which I think will be nice. We also have 28 separate session topics this year, but there are hundreds and hundreds of sessions. So, Katie, let me start with you. Are there any sessions that you particularly will be interested in that you have your eye on?
Well, I think that, yeah, there's a few for sure. I think as a community, the HPC community, we're going through a huge amount of change right now. And of course, there's the seemingly daily change and advances coming from AI. There's new technologies and processor technologies, memory technologies, storage technologies that are coming to market. There's the increasing role of the hyperscalers in the HPC community. And I think how we navigate this kind of new and challenging waters is going to be a really key discussion at the conference. I think it's going to be a big change in the next decade that we're looking for. And so there's a number of keynote sessions and panels that are addressing these topics, kind of these big strategic meaty topics that I think as a community we need to get our hands around. And I'm looking forward to hearing those keynotes, but also the follow-on discussions that happen in the BOFs and in the after conference meals, and they have like a fun run that starts every morning. So I think this is going to be a great conference.
Okay. Addison, I know you, of course, are looking closely at that convergence of supercomputing, data center, hyperscale. And that is the Tuesday keynote by a senior engineer from Google. I know yesterday you gave your market update. Maybe you could share some thoughts in that area.
Well, yeah, looking at the convergence between hyperscale and high performance computing and AI and how they interplay all together is definitely one of the major industry dynamics that we've been tracking. We have to look at hyperscale companies as a whole, which is bigger than cloud, of course. Cloud service provider is one line of business that a hyperscale company could do. Google is bigger than just Google Cloud. Google is already a big company aside from that. But when you look at how much data center infrastructure they consume, it's half of the data infrastructure worldwide by revenue is consumed by the hyperscale companies, and they do an awful lot of AI. They're the biggest consumers of technology for AI. They also become important suppliers in terms of cloud, which now had its 8th straight year of double-digit growth across HPC and AI. Now, we think that's reaching near its max penetration of HPC AI, but there's still a really important segment because there's a lot of value in being able to do HPC and AI workloads on a utility basis. So hearing that keynote in terms of what the cloud brings for AI and also what hyperscale companies get out of AI, I think is a really important trend for us to be monitoring.
Yeah, and Earl, maybe you could jump in too on this topic. But we've heard for several years that the data center of the future will look more and more like a supercomputer. Maybe what are some of your thoughts on that convergence?
Yes, to me, it's just amazing because one perspective we have is HPC actually moving into the more non-HPC commercial spaces. But in particular, with all the resurgence in what AI is happening with AI and all the examples, with ChatGTP and the similar ones like that, we're seeing AI be penetrating the market, and just not the HPC, but all different ones at a rate we've never seen before. I mean, literally just a few months and you're millions of users. And so we're expecting this to be just the edge of a major growth curve right now. And it's both driven by AI, but also that HPC is kind of a fundamental technology to make AI work. And when you listen to people, and at least when we talk to a lot of people about, what they think about AI, what they're doing today, what they plan to do in the future, the common response is, well, we've figured out how to do these pieces, but we think we really can be successful doing something that takes multiple orders of magnitude more data, multiple orders of magnitude more computers. And it's actually led to an issue where people are saying, gee, if we're going to do that and do that frequently, we're going to use so much power that it's going to be a big percent of the world electricity we're going to actually start consuming. So we're seeing these side impacts also happening. But it's very exciting times, as Katie was saying. We're excited to just learn about all the new technologies out there. From an analyst perspective, it's hard to keep track of all the new processors, all the new CPUs, the storage, the network solutions, CXL and recomposable computing. So it's just amazing to us. And that's what we look forward to at ISC, is it's actually a major learning event for us.
Well, Earl, sticking with you, I know you have your market update,
Right.
Your breakfast on Tuesday morning in Hamburg. What are some of the top line insights you'll be sharing?
Right. So, as usual with ours, we're going to try to cover every area that we can. So we'll be talking about, the traditional HPC mod sim, AI, cloud computing, but then quantum computing, what's going on with new technologies, composability. And we'll also be talking a lot more about sustainability. We've just created in the last 6 months a new practice focused on sustainability. And also, we're trying to figure out how to address the diversity issue in the industry right now, because the industry's major problem we see is the lack of talent. The number of people retiring and planning to retire over the next few years just greatly exceeds the number of people entering the sector. So we need to find ways to get a much more diverse set of people in the industry itself. Now, on the actual market size, last year, we saw some growth in the market. It was around 4%, a little bit lower than our expectations. Part of that was, the frontier system was only half accepted. So the other half should be accepted this year. We're bullish that this year looks pretty good. And that is because there's some exascale machines being accepted. We're very nervous, though, because the economic conditions are still, very severe. On the cloud side, as far as using cloud for HPC, we see continued growth there, and we're expecting to see, sizable penetration growth and growth in cloud computing. But the real trigger here is AI with machine learning and deep learning, because we're seeing that many of the traditional mod sim sites have already incorporated AI somewhere. Sometimes it's just data prep. Sometimes it's, figuring out the results. Sometimes it's just steering, computational steering. If you have a problem you're trying to solve that has, 10,000 different possible iterations, reducing that to the best 100 and then spending all your time on that 100 is a tremendous advantage out there. And then we're seeing AI actually being incorporated into the programs itself. So in our market update, we'll be covering all those different pieces. And of course, our forecasts on which are the highest growth areas will be included.
Okay. I was looking over the agenda, and if the agenda reflects the HPC community's, particular areas of interest, and I'm sure it does, there are 106 sessions that deal with future processing chip technology. There are 81 for the topic emerging HPC processors and accelerators, and 25 for the topic computing beyond Moore's law. So the AI and HPC, it's sort of these two planets in a harmonic kind of orbit that are driving each other. Katie, any thoughts in those areas?
Yeah, well, one that I think is related is that for a while now, we've been hearing about this future kind of digital twin use case. And I'll have to say I've been interested in it, but I hadn't really seen kind of a concrete example of it. But when you look at the the program, there's actually a couple posters, I think what they call a focus session from Bill Tang, a fusion use case. And so I'm really interested to see some of these come alive and become real. And so the concept right there, right, is to have a digital simulation going alongside of a physical experiment. And so I think that's one thing that I'm going to definitely follow up on.
Okay, great. And Addison, what topics and sessions are you particularly focused on next week?
Well, I mean, that's the hard one because I agree with what you were saying, and Katie and Earl chimed in on, which is the absolute richness of this program. I kind of want to go to every session and visit every booth, and I don't think there would be a person in attendance who I wouldn't enjoy having a half-hour one-on-one sit down with. So it is tough. You highlight this evolution of the processor space, and I do think that's one of the most dynamic areas right now. And to get into naming any 6 of them, I would be leaving out dozens of others that are worthy of consideration. Although I think the main dynamic still comes down to the interplay between Intel, AMD, and NVIDIA, all of which have CPU, GPU integration on the near-term roadmap, and how that plays out and what room is left for everybody else to compete with their specialized processors. As Earl was saying, is an important industry dynamic that we talk to end users about. What are their priorities? Where does sustainability come in terms of power consumption? I think we are hearing a lot more about performance per watt and not just performance per my monetary budget, but my physical budget. That's huge. Now I don't want to ignore networking, storage, cloud, other topics. These all have different inflection points in play right now. So it's one of these conferences that I could go to 4 times in a row and have a completely different experience every time and have it be valuable every time. So I'm excited to be there.
And then there's the social aspect of just catching up with people that we haven't seen in a year, and all of that. Earl, any sessions in particular or topics that you'll be focused on?
Yeah, so we have the team out there, and we've kind of been going through the calendar for all the events over the last couple of weeks and trying to figure out who's going to cover which one. As Addison was saying, there's just so many different things to cover. And it's so difficult when you talk, Doug, when you mention hundreds on just this topic or, 50 on this topic and so on. It's really hard to down select and decide which ones are the most important. And to us, one of the issues we're trying to help a lot of our customers with is to figure out what to purchase or plan for over the next, 2 years. It used to be always 5 years, but literally the next 2 years. And one of the big requirements is you're going to have flexibility in your planning process, because who knows which is the right processor choice, the right mix of accelerators, what's the right mix of processor to accelerator, what is the right interconnect, and all the new software that's coming out too. So the flexibility issue, we think, is really difficult. And it's where we're talking to a lot of folks there as far as the end users also who may not be presenting, but, in attendance, like you mentioned, to just understand how they're thinking through that process, because we want to better understand, how that's going to work. And I have to do a call out. I think John Schaff and the whole team there has done a tremendous job pulling together this agenda, the speakers, the presenters, and from the early signs of registration, it looks like, they're going to have a tremendous show.
Yeah, and overlaying everything, I think, will be the AI explosion that really began in November with ChatGPT, and the tremendous pressure public sector and private sector organizations are under to get us pull a strategy together. Because the headlines we keep seeing is everybody's moving toward this. They're trying to understand how to use large language models in all sorts of under all sorts of strategies for productivity gains.
Yeah, those large language models are one of the most common use cases for AI, even across HPC using organizations that are integrating AI. Now we see image recognition is still number one, and there's a lot of that in pre and post process. Earl talked about the target reduction in pre-process. That's a great use case for AI. I think we're going to see it in areas like mesh refinement, where the areas that machine learning can play around a traditional HPC modeling and simulation workload to optimize it. I do think that that's where we are now with the integration.
And Katie, maybe we'll conclude with this question. It was interesting, Addison, at your presentation yesterday with Dan Olds. I think it was Dan who noted that the media and vendors are really out ahead of the user community. I think we're talking in the AI context that, and naturally the vendors and media are always looking at what's on the horizon. But Katie, from your perspective, how is this HPC AI combination? How are you seeing that manifest itself in the work at NERSC?
Well, it's definitely being integrated by our user community. I mean, I think we have to remember that the science community, has to validate the results. It goes through the peer review process, and so that can take a while. As if you're thinking about replacing, what had been a computational kernel with, a surrogate model. I mean, these things, take time to build into physics models or other science capabilities. So it's absolutely accelerating at NERSC. I mean, we see the growth and the usage of AI frameworks just exploding. We also see users interacting with their data in completely new ways that a decade ago we wouldn't have talked about. I would say at NERSC there are more logins from Jupyter than there are from SSH. That is a huge sea change in the way that people in our user community are interacting and using these systems. And so I don't have any doubt that will continue.
Great. All right, I'll ask one more question. Does anyone have views on the top 500 list, which is always a news feature at ISC? Do we think there'll be major changes at the top of the list, or kind of a parade from the last list last November?
Sure, I can start with that. Our expectation, and this only expectation because we have not seen the new list, is that the Chinese will continue not to put anything on the very upper half. And let me just say, less than the upper half, the upper 50 will see very few. We think the Chinese will continue to add more in the lower half of the list, as they have for the last few years. We also don't think we'll see a new U.S. exascale one. Argonne has the hardware installed, but I don't believe they've had time to run the top 500. Again, I'm just speculating on that. So we may see some small number of changes. Europe's exascale systems don't go online for quite a bit of time right now. So our expectation is limited change in the upper 50, and we're looking to see what happens with the remaining 450 right now.
Addison, how about you? Any thoughts in that area?
I think Earl covered that pretty well, and we are under NDA in some areas, so I don't want to get into it. But I do think that there's a lot of anticipation about upcoming changes to the top of the list. So top 500, I will say, is always a favorite session of mine. I love watching top 500, but I'm going to stay out of speculating on what will happen.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks so much to all three of you, Katie Antypas, Earl Joseph, Addison Snell, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Doug.